Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Mission: Impossible 2 2000 Movie Review. Mission: Impossible 2, titled on screen as Mission: Impossible 2 and abbreviated as MI2, is a 2000 action spy film directed by John Woo from a screenplay by Robert Towne, and produced by and starring Tom Cruise. It is a standalone sequel to Mission: Impossible, 1996, and the second installment in the Mission: Impossible film series. The film also stars Dougray Scott, Thandiwe Newton, Richard Roxburgh, John Polson, Brendan Gleeson, Raid Serbzija and Ving Rhames. In the film, Ethan Hunt, Cruise, teams with professional thief Nia Nordhoff Newton, to secure a genetically modified disease, chimera, held by rogue Impossible Missions Force, IMF, agent Sean Ambrose, Scott, who is Nordhoff's former lover. Mission: Impossible 2 was theatrically released in the United States by Paramount Pictures on May 24, 2000, and grossed over $546 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing film of that year. It received mixed reviews from critics, with praise for the action sequences and Woo's direction, but criticism for the characterization. A third film, Mission: Impossible 3, was released in 2006. In Sydney, biogenetics scientist Dr. Vladimir Nekhorvish sends a message to the IMF for Dmitry, Ethan Hunt's cover name, his old friend, warning that his employer, Biocide Pharmaceuticals, forced him to develop a biological weapon, the chimera virus, to profit from the cure, Bellerophon. He injects himself with the virus, carrying Bellerophon in a bag. However, en route to Atlanta, IMF agent Sean Ambrose, disguised as Dmitry, goes rogue and betrays Nekhorvish, using sleeping gas on everyone aboard, steals Bellerophon, and jumps out of the plane before it crashes into the Rockies. In Seville, IMF director Swanbeck informs Ethan about Ambrose's actions, tasks him with recovering chimera and Bellerophon, and has him recruit Nia Nordhoff, a professional thief and Ambrose's ex-girlfriend. Despite her initial reluctance, Ethan gets her to trace Ambrose to Sydney using an injectable tracking device. Ethan assembles his team, old friend and computer hacker Luther Stickle, and helicopter pilot Billy Baird in Sydney while Nia pretends to rekindle her relationship with Ambrose. After Ambrose uses a video of chimera infecting one of Nekhorvish's colleagues to blackmail Biocide CEO, John McCloy, into cooperation, Nia gives Ethan the memory card containing the video, revealing that chimera has a 20-hour dormant period. Bellerophon is only effective if used within that window. Ethan's team kidnaps McCloy and learns that the only Bellerophon samples, taken by Nekhorvish, are now in Ambrose's hands, but he doesn't have the virus since Nekhorvish injected himself with it. Ethan breaks into Biocide headquarters and destroys 2 samples of chimera, but Ambrose's team ambushes him, having discovered Nia's deception. At a stalemate, Ambrose orders Nia to retrieve the virus last sample, but she injects herself with it instead and begs Ethan to kill her to destroy the virus. Ethan refuses and flees the facility, promising to get her the cure. Ambrose releases Nia to wander the streets of Sydney, intending to start a pandemic. At Biocide's storage facility on Bear Island, he offers to sell Bellerophon to McCloy in exchange for enough stock options to make him Biocide's majority shareholder, enabling him and McCloy to make billions. Ethan infiltrates the base and fights Ambrose's right-hand man, Hugh Stamp. Stamp seemingly brings a subdued Ethan to Ambrose, who executes him. However, Ambrose, upon seeing Stamp's bandaged finger, which he had earlier cut with a cigar cutter for questioning his trust in Nia, discovers that the dead Ethan is Stamp, masked and gagged, while the actual Ethan has stolen the Bellerophon samples. Enraged, Ambrose and his men chase Ethan onto the mainland. Hunt kills them, while Luther and Billy locate Nia, who has wandered to a cliffside to kill herself and prevent the outbreak. Ethan kills Ambrose in an extended fist fight on the beach and gives Bellerophon to the arriving Luther, who injects Nia with it. In return for her cooperation, the IMF clears Nia's criminal record, and Ethan starts a vacation with her in Sydney. William Goldman says he was the first writer on the film. "All that's left of mine is the climax, the climbing up the rock sequence," he said. "I couldn't come up with a good villain and Bob Towne did." According to screenwriter Robert Towne, several action sequences were already planned for the film prior to his involvement and before the story had been written. Ving Rhames had dropped out of Any Given Sunday following production delays, eventually reprising his role as Luther Stickle. Ian McKellen was offered the part of Mission Commander Swanbeck, but turned it down. Instead, he would take on the roles of Magneto in X-Men and Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings trilogy simultaneously. Thandiwe Newton declined to portray Alex Munsey in Charlie's Angels in favor of Nia Nordhoff-Hall. Tom Cruise regretted killing off Jack Harmon in the previous film and attempted to include the character in the sequel. This idea was abandoned as Cruise and John Woo couldn't come up with a plausible way for Harmon to have survived his death in the previous film. Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga's draft of the script included Willie Armitage as one of the team members, though the role would have been recast with a younger actor instead of original cast member Peter Lupus. The studio expressed concern about the safety of filming Cruise's entrance scene, in which he is free solo climbing at Dead Horse Point State Park in Moab, Utah. Cruise refused to drop the idea because he could not think of a better way to reintroduce the character. There was no safety net as he filmed the sequence, but he did have a harness and a thin wire. He tore his shoulder when performing the jump from one part of the cliff to another. Newton discussed her unpleasant on-set experiences with Cruise during the shooting of the balcony sequence in a 2020 interview. According to Newton, Cruise was heavily stressed over the expectations of the sequel being good and was upset during the shooting of said scene because she had the shittiest lines. The two decided to reverse role-play each other as practice. However, it was unhelpful for her and pushed her into a place of terror and insecurity. After the shooting was finished for the day, she contacted Jonathan Demme, telling him what happened. Looking back on that day, Newton said about Cruise, "Bless him. And I really do mean bless him because he was trying his damnedest." Production was delayed due to problems with the screenplay and budget, and Cruise had to take a break from filming to do publicity for Eyes Wide Shut. Combined with scheduling conflicts and injuries he sustained in a motorcycle accident while filming, Dougray Scott decided not to play the role of Wolverine in X-Men. During the final fight scene between Ethan Hunt and Sean Ambrose, Cruise insisted that a real knife be used. The knife was attached to a cable and was carefully measured to stop a quarter of an inch from Cruise's eyeball, and Cruise asked Scott to put his full strength down on the knife to get a realistic look for the scene. The film's original score was composed by Hans Zimmer and features vocals performed by Lisa Gerrard. In addition, the film includes contemporary music such as Limp Bizkit's rendition of Lalo Schifrin's Mission Impossible theme entitled Take a Look Around, as well as Metallica's I Disappear. While Ethan is rock climbing during his holiday, Zap Mama's remixed version of Eco Eco plays on the soundtrack. About the score, Zimmer said, "The love theme from Mission Impossible 2 was written about 6 weeks before they started shooting. I was on it that early. Then, we had a big meeting in Australia. They had the love theme, and I knew what the story was about, and I always thought it was about these two men being in love with the girl. So I said to the record company guy, look, here's one thing I would love you to do, when you find bands for me, make them all female. Make them all about sirens." Of course, what did I get? A bunch of heavy metal bands with guys. I promise you, it would have been a better movie, and it would have been a better score. In 2024, Diego Pineda Pacheco from Collider singled out Mission Impossible 2 as one of Zimmer's most underrated scores, especially for the injection scene. The film's score is imbued with Spanish influences, filling the romance at the core of the narrative with passion and flair. The teaser trailer for Mission Impossible 2 was released online and in theaters with Sleepy Hollow and The World Is Not Enough in November 1999. A new trailer then premiered on March 10, 2000. Mission Impossible 2 was originally set for a Christmas release date of December 17, 1999, but was delayed to a Memorial Day weekend release date of May 24, 2000. Universal Pictures made an agreement with Paramount to attach the trailer for How the Grinch Stole Christmas to Mission: Impossible 2 screenings in exchange for showing one of the studio's trailers in front of Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps. Warner Brothers Pictures would also agree to play the trailer for their upcoming The Perfect Storm before the showings of Mission: Impossible 2. Mission: Impossible 2 was released on VHS and DVD on November 7, 2000, with a rare Japanese Laserdisc release following on April 3, 2001, released late in the format's life, with a potential North American release of this Laserdisc being cancelled in mid-2001. The DVD release features an audio commentary, behind-the-scenes footage, documentaries, Metallica's I Disappear music video, an MTV Movie and TV Awards parody called Mission Improbable, an alternate title sequence, DVD-ROM and other bonus materials. The film debuted at the top of the DVD sales chart in its first week, beating out Titan AE, The Patriot, U-571 and Frequency. By the end of the 2000s, it had generated $86 million in home video sales revenue. It also ranked fourth among the year's top DVD rentals, behind The Sixth Sense, The Green Mile and Gladiator, making $7.6 million. A Blu-ray release premiered on June 3, 2008, and an Ultra HD Blu-ray version followed on June 26, 2018. On opening day, Mission: Impossible 2 made $12.5 million, making it the fourth highest grossing Wednesday opening, behind Men in Black, Independence Day, and Star Wars: Episode I, The Phantom Menace. Playing at 3,653 theaters, it had the largest number of screenings of any film, beating Scream 3. The film would go on to hold this record until it was surpassed by Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone the following year. It grossed $57,845,297, crossing over Toy Story 2 to have the third highest grossing opening weekend of all time, behind The Lost World, Jurassic Park and The Phantom Menace. Moreover, the film surpassed its predecessor Mission: Impossible for not only having the highest grossing opening weekend for a film based on a TV show, but also the largest opening weekend for any Paramount film. It also dethroned Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, for scoring the biggest opening weekend for a spy film, a position it held until Austin Powers in Goldmember in 2002. The TV show opening weekend record would last for 7 years until The Simpsons movie was released in 2007. Additionally, Mission: Impossible 2 would achieve the biggest opening weekend for a Tom Cruise film for 5 years until 2005, when War of the Worlds replaced it. The film generated $91.8 million in its first 6 days of release, making it the second highest Memorial Day opening weekend, after The Lost World, Jurassic Park. Within 8 days, it earned a total $100.1 million, not only making it the third film of 2000 to reach the $100 million mark, after Erin Brockovich and Gladiator, but the fourth fastest film to do so as well. When Mission: Impossible 2 first opened, the film was ranked number 1 at the US box office, beating Dinosaur, Shanghai Noon, Gladiator, and Road Trip. For the film's second weekend, it collected a total of $27 million, outgrossing Big Mama's House in the process. It held on to the number 1 spot for a total of 2 weekends until it was overtaken by Gone in 60 Seconds. Mission: Impossible 2 was the most recent film to top the box office for multiple weekends until Hollow Man that August. During its third weekend, the film went on to become the highest grossing domestic release of the year, surpassing Gladiator. It would remain so until that December, when it was dethroned by How the Grinch Stole Christmas. The film started its international release on June 1, 2000, and topped the Australian box office ahead of Gladiator and 28 Days with a gross of $3.7 million, $6.4 million, in its opening 4-day weekend from 366 screens, a record for United International Pictures. It maintained number 1 for 3 weekends before being displaced by Me, Myself and Irene. It was a big success in Japan, recording the second biggest opening ever behind Star Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, with a gross of $13.6 million from 356 screens, grossing over $50 million in just over 3 weeks and $94 million in total. The film also delivered the third highest opening in Spain with $2.9 million, after the latter film and The Sixth Sense. In the United Kingdom, Mission Impossible 2 managed to beat out Chicken Run to top the box office, making $6.2 million, £4.1 million, in its opening weekend. During its second weekend, it fell into second place once Chicken Run reclaimed the number 1 spot, but still earned $3.7 million, £2.5 million, and outgrossed The Patriot and Thomas and the Magic Railroad. It recorded the biggest July opening in Germany with a 4-day gross of $7.9 million and had record openings in Austria, $1.3 million, and Russia, $0.3 million. The opening in Austria surpassed the previous all-time record held by Men in Black. At the end of its run, Mission Impossible 2 eventually grossed $215,409,889 in the United States and Canada and $330,978,216 in other territories, for a total worldwide gross of $546,388,105, making it the highest grossing film of 2000. The film also became the third highest grossing film of that year domestically, behind How the Grinch Stole Christmas and Cast Away. It is John Woo's highest grossing film, surpassing Face/Off, and was the highest grossing film in the Mission Impossible series until the release of the fourth film, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, in 2011. Review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes indicates Mission Impossible 2 has an overall approval rating of 58% based on 208 reviews, with an average rating of 5.9/10. The site's critical consensus reads, "Your cranium may crave more substance, but your eyes will feast on the amazing action sequences." Metacritic assigned the film a weighted average score of 59 out of 100, based on 40 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B on an A+ to F scale, down from the first film's B+. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times awarded the film 3 out of 4 stars, stating, "If the first movie was entertaining as sound, fury, and movement, this one is more evolved, more confident, more sure-footed in the way it marries minimal character development to seamless action." Sean Levy of The Oregonian gave the film a B+, stating that if you've ever wished that a really good action director John Woo, say, would make a James Bond film, you can stop wishing. In a 2.5 out of 4 review, Jeffrey Westhoff of Northwest Herald explained that if the first Mission Impossible was confusing because the plot moved too fast, this one is confusing because the plot hardly moves. Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly felt the film was a throwaway pleasure but also a triumph of souped-up action. Jack Matthews of New York Daily Times noticed that there's solid chemistry between Cruise and the stunning Newton, a superb actress previously restricted to such ethnic roles as Sally Hemings in Jefferson in Paris and the title role in Beloved. Ella Taylor of LA Weekly said that every car chase, every plane crash, every potential drop off a cliff is a masterpiece of grace and surprise. Dessen Howe of the Washington Post said that John Woo takes complete command of the latest technology to create brilliant action sequences. Mark Salof of the Austin Chronicle wrote, "As pure a summer popcorn overdose as you're likely to find, MI2 is breezy, breathless, brainless fun, falling just short of Woo's own Face/Off, but head and shoulders above anything else out there just now." J. Hoberman of The Village Voice called the film a vaguely absurd thriller filled with elaborately superfluous setups and shamelessly stale James Bond riffs. Steve Purcell of Tampa Bay Times stated that Woo directs Mission Impossible 2 cautiously, as if still introducing himself to US audiences despite face/off and Broken Arrow. Or maybe he has nothing left to say about the poetry of violence after such visual eloquence in his Chinese classics. Dennis Harvey of Variety said the film is even more empty a luxury vehicle than its predecessor, and that it pushes the envelope in terms of just how much flashy packaging an audience will buy when there's absolutely nada inside. Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader said that no hero or villain winds up carrying any moral weight at all. In a retrospective commentary in 2012, Brad Brevet noted the film has significant similarities in plot and themes to Alfred Hitchcock's 1946 film Notorious. Mission: Impossible 2 won both Best Male Performance for Tom Cruise and Best Action Sequence at the MTV Movie Awards. However, it was nominated for 2 Golden Raspberry Awards at the 2000 ceremony for Worst Remake or Sequel and Worst Supporting Actress for Thandiwe Newton, both of which went to Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2 and Kelly Preston in Battlefield Earth respectively. It was also nominated for a Stinker Award at the 2000 ceremony for Worst Song, Limp Bizkit's Take a Look Around, losing to Baha Men's Who Let the Dogs Out in Rugrats in Paris. For his work on the film, Cruise was nominated for both Choice Movie Actor and Choice Summer Movie Wipeout at the 2000 Teen Choice Awards, but simultaneously lost to Freddie Prinze Jr. in Down to You and Jim Carrey in Me, Myself and Irene. The film received 4 nominations at the 5th Golden Satellite Awards for Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Sound and Best Visual Effects. Super spy Ethan Hunt can't even escape assignments by taking off on a secluded rock climbing expedition. Once his employers find him, they send him on yet another impossible mission inspired by the gadgets, chases, latex faces and beat the clock daring-do popularized in the classic CBS TV series of the same title. This time Hunt must stop the villainous Sean Ambrose, a former fellow agent gone bad who's trying to make billions of dollars by unleashing a deadly virus on society while holding the patent on the antidote. To glean information from Ambrose, Hunt enlists the aid of the Bada's ex-girlfriend, Naya, an accomplished thief. But upon spending time with the ebony-skinned British beauty, Hunt has mixed feelings about sending her undercover with the dangerous killer. Audiences expect and receive a roller coaster ride full of tense moments, action-packed showdowns, fast, expensive, cars and big explosions in exotic locales. If this sounds like the average James Bond movie, you're not far off. It adheres pretty closely to that formula. But Hunt is a somewhat more noble hero than 007, making it easier to root for him. In the end, the bad guys are eliminated, the world is saved from a hideous biochemical beast and the door remains open for another sequel. Positive elements: unlike James Bond, who abuses his license to kill at the slightest provocation, Ethan Hunt resists murdering people unless it is an absolutely necessary act of self-defense. As evidence, his nemesis predicts that Hunt will try to penetrate a secure laboratory from the roof, saying, he'll attempt aerobatic insanity before risking harming a hair on a security guard's head. In other words, he's no Neo, either. Not only does Hunt show concern for innocent bystanders, a quality definitely not shared by the film's villains, but he also exercises restraint when subduing his mortal enemies. He'd much rather knock them out than put a bullet in them, and demonstrates this frequently, though he must shoot to kill in several flurries of gunfire. At least twice, Hunt practices sacrificial devotion to Naya by putting himself in danger to help her. Spiritual content: a Spanish festival involves locals carrying a large crucifix through the streets, and Hopkins questions the custom of honoring their saints by setting them on fire. Sexual content: Naya and Hunt's first encounter strays way out of bounds. They meet as she's trying to steal a necklace. When the owner unexpectedly returns home, Hunt and Naya, who wears an extremely low-cut dress, lie, fully clothed, in a sexual position to avoid detection. Soon thereafter, he makes a sexual proposition. She replies, "This is awfully short notice. Care to wait a decent interval?" he asks. Naya responds breathlessly, "Who wants to be decent?" The next thing the audience sees is the couple lying in bed together the next morning. Elsewhere, Naya undresses in front of a lusting Ambrose who grabs her arm and implies he wants sex before she covers back up. Unsure that Naya has the skills to successfully feign interest in her old beau, Hunt gets a crass response from his superior, to go to bed with a man and lie to him. She's a woman, she's got all the training she needs. Violent content, frequent, though not excessively graphic. Flurries of gunfire, explosions, fiery car wrecks and more. A doctor's neck is broken. We see disturbing photos of one man who has succumbed to the awful virus, and another who has been viciously murdered and stuffed in luggage. Many men are shot, several at close range. Ambrose slices off the end of a cohort's finger with a cigar cutter. He and his cronies hijack a passenger jet and bail out before sending a plane full of innocent people crashing into a mountain. A carload of bad guys gets annihilated by a Mack truck. There's also a considerable amount of bone-crunching hand-to-hand combat. Much of the violence is either sped up or shot in operatic slow-mo. According to director John Woo, I like to shoot the action in a very emotional way, using slow motion and creating a lot of romance in the sequence. I see action almost as a ballet and sometimes as a cartoon. Indeed, it has a glamorous veneer. Crude or profane language, just over a dozen profanities. No F-words, but 2 S-words pop up and the misogynistic Ambrose refers to Naya as a B.ch several times. Drug and alcohol content, Ambrose, and a few other minor characters, drink alcohol. Other negative elements, characters gamble at a racetrack. Naya is an unrepentant thief who has her criminal record wiped clean for cooperating with Hunt's team. Summary: that time-tested mission, impossible theme music given modern flair with bursts of electric guitar is an irresistible attention grabber. Add a magnetic star like Tom Cruise, impressive stunt work and eye-popping action and you have the makings of a summer blockbuster. Hopkins' uncredited cameo is small, but memorable. And Dougray Scott's evil genius is a formidable foe, a far cry from the charming prince he played opposite Drew Barrymore in Ever After. Still, I can't recommend it. This sequel is an adrenaline rush that, while fun at times, should have adopted the modus operandi of its hero and throttled back on the body count. Action does not demand fatalities and mission impossible 2 tags too many toes. There's also implied casual sex and a smattering of sensual dialogue that send irresponsible messages. Let's hope for a little more cruise control in MI3. Sitting there in a darkened theater, waiting for the trailers to start, listening to the 4 guys in front of me discussing the dynamics of transporter functions, whether it would be prudent to transport someone's atoms to the surface of the sun if there was a chance of reassembling them on the transport back, I had started wondering if perhaps I was in the wrong theater. My discomfort increased when the couple next to me joined in the conversation with their theories of time and temperature. Affecting transport: if you were a murderer trying to place yourself in a poker game 1 hour prior and 1 hour after a murder, using a transporter so that you would not be detected. The hairs on the back of my neck rose up in alert when the 3 behind me piped in about why it was impossible to reassemble the atoms of a living organism, because the organism was always moving, only inanimate objects could be reassembled because they didn't move. I didn't move either. I stayed very still, wondering where the hell was I? Why was I surrounded by Trekkies? How weird is this? But then I remembered who was credited for writing this movie. Get the biggest popcorn bucket you can handle, sit down, buckle up, shut up and hold on. Wow. Great action. The motorcycle chase scene was literally jaw-dropping. Motorcycles were never built to do stunts like that. I was so amazed. Lots of very classic Wooisms, which is one of my favorite games to play watching his movies, and I love to spot them. One very important one was left out, but I won't say which. The story was kinda lame, and I had a very difficult time believing the romantic edge of it, although I will admit that I do believe in love at first sight. But Cruise and Newton had no chemistry between them. And I always have a tough time with those, dark man-ish, masks that they pull off their faces so that you can never tell who is really who. The bad guy Scott, known for his memorable appearances in Ever After, Deep Impact and Princess Caribou, was mean enough, as the former IMF guy who turned greedy and decided to threaten the world by selling the antidote to a lethal lab-created virus to the highest bidder, yada, yada. As I said, kinda lame story, but I always love technology, toys, and some of the most unbelievable action stunts ever. I was disappointed that Tom Cruise didn't walk out of a hospital holding a baby, with a cigarette in his mouth, because that would have been a signature and a half. Rames was kept in the background, and I would have liked to see him have more presence on the screen. And Anthony Hopkins, I have no clue what he was doing in the 3 minutes he was in this movie. For his part, really, anyone would have done. They should have saved the money and put it towards a better screenplay. But it is a great action movie, and must be seen on the big screen to be truly appreciated. The locations were spectacular and majestic, although I could tell the trekkers weren't thrilled that the Enterprise didn't show up to save the Earth this time. The rule about sequels never being as good as the first film does not apply here. This looked and felt better, and I look forward to seeing the next one. TC Editor, the film sums up both the best, and the worst, of Hollywood cinema. It's gloriously excessive, and anyone who denies that they felt adrenaline surging through their bodies for the entire last 30 minutes should be checked for a pulse. However, it is an astonishingly empty movie, particularly in a first half which completely fails to go anywhere. This is largely down to Thandiwe, who holds back every scene in which she appears, and the supposed appeal of her squashed little features is entirely lost on me. Once she is moved aside, John Woo is allowed to roll up his sleeves and hurl set piece after set piece at the camera. At times it's unclear whether he is sinking into cliché, or engaging in sly self-parody. The plot sucks, there's no other word for it, and I can't help but feel nostalgic for the days when Woo made films which had a little more, indeed, any, emotional content. Still, if you're not looking for that sort of thing, this is entirely fine. If you remove an early scene where Tom Cruise's long-haired hero Ethan Hunt receives his "your mission, should you choose to accept it" message via sunglasses, after which he throws the "will self-destruct in 5 seconds" message at the viewer as it explodes, if only 3D were popular then, there's almost no connecting the dimwit Mission Impossible 2 to Brian De Palma's virtuoso predecessor from 1996, nor even the original CBS television series from the 1960s. Directed by Hong Kong action maestro John Woo, the 2000 film reduces the franchise's spy thriller origins into a brainless action movie packed with standard Wooisms. From overused slow motion to random doves, from motorcycle chases to mid-air shootouts with a gun in each hand, Woo slathers on his directorial signatures, making this big-budget sequel even more confounded than its unintentionally silly, humorless, run-of-the-mill plotline alone, which is a considerable sum. Cruise/Wagner Productions and Paramount Pictures sought a sequel strong enough to stand alone, rather than pick up precisely where De Palma's film left off. In part, this was a reaction to a widespread belief that De Palma's Mission Impossible lacked personal motivations for its characters. But more significantly, it lacked action and sex, all those kiss-kiss-bang-bang qualities that appeal to commercial audiences. As a result, the filmmakers resolved on a change in tone, a shift in directorial style, and a more actionized plot for their second go-round. And so, rather than try something matchless, as De Palma had done, the producers countered with mainstream overkill by hiring Woo, whose recent hits Broken Arrow, 1996, and Face/Off, 1997, suggested the director's Hollywood career would be just as successful, commercially, not artistically, as his Hong Kong films. But from day one, bringing on Woo pigeonholed the production into mere John Woo film territory and nothing more. Naming it Mission Impossible only rubbed salt in the wound of franchise fans. Robert Towne, who contributed to the original story, wrote the script, although several other writers tinkered here too, in full James Bond mode. yet with a tonal sedateness that sought to heighten the viewer's involvement through typical devices, namely, a love interest and end-of-the-world stakes. Woo added his own contributions by elaborating on the story to allow for maximum action, including multiple car chases, latex mask reveals, and gunfights galore. Due to disagreements over the script, and reported creative clashing between Cruise and Woo, production shut down for nearly 2 months as the script was retooled. This became most unfortunate for Dougray Scott, playing the film's villain. Scott was originally cast as the iconic superhero Wolverine in Bryan Singer's X-Men 2000, which was scheduled to shoot immediately after MI2, as it became known. Because of the delay, Scott was forced to bow out, and Hugh Jackman took over as Wolverine. Note, there's probably not a day that goes by that Scott doesn't regret signing to this movie. Instead of Jackman's hugely successful career and several X-Men sequels, Scott has been reduced to drivel like Hitman 2007, and the second direct-to-video sequel of Death Race. The story opens with Ethan Hunt free climbing a Utah ridge on his vacation, and his high-effort climbing scowls will become a permanent fixture throughout the movie. Despite his best attempt to hide, his IMF superior, Anthony Hopkins, uncredited, finds Hunt and orders him to Spain, where he's to recruit professional thief Nia, Thandiwe, pouting through her performance, to bed and investigate her ex-boyfriend, former IMF agent Sean Ambrose, Scott. Located in Sydney, Australia, Ambrose has arranged a scheme with a pharmaceutical company man, Brendan Gleeson, wasted on a one-note role, to unleash a deadly virus on the public, after which they'll make the ready-to-go vaccine available for purchase and earn millions. Of course, before Nia's seduction duties begin, she has just enough time to fall for Hunt, making the whole ordeal disagreeable for both. But if audiences took issue with their underestimation of Cruise's role from Mission Impossible, the sequel makes the original's Ethan Hunt look multi-dimensional in comparison. Cruise's seriousness is never once lightened by the actor's natural energy or charm, as it had done in the first one. His orange tan does most of his acting. Worse, Cruise's sexual chemistry with Newton is almost non-existent. He shared more playful scenes and cleverly flirtatious dialogue with Vanessa Redgrave in De Palma's film. As the plot drags on, Hunt's IMF pals Luther Stickle, Ving Rhames, and Aussie comic relief pilot Billy Bird, John Polson, because Steve Irwin wasn't available, case Ambrose. A heist-like mission to destroy the deadly virus fails, and Ambrose catches on quickly to Nia's double cross. To get the jump on one another and propel a number of convoluted plot twists, they engage in latex mask games, with Ambrose wearing a Hunt mask and vice versa to confuse the barrage of hired goons. Shootouts commence. Nia injects herself with the virus to protect the world, giving Hunt only 20 hours to save her. A digital countdown reminds us how last-minute Hunt's inevitable rescue will be. More shootouts. More rubber masks. Grenades are tossed. Hunt has the option of a red motorcycle or a black one. He chooses black, but only after putting on his shades and leather coat. Now he's a biker. Then there's some fire, and Tom Cruise rides his black motorcycle through it. In the finale, we learn the IMF apparently teaches its agents that, in a motorcycle fight, you should ride head-on against your opponent and then, when you're close enough, jump off the bike and collide with your enemy mid-air. Hunt and Ambrose do just that. After some extended hand-to-hand combat on a beach, Hunt defeats Ambrose with a series of kicks, and Nia is rescued only to become another in a long line of forgotten Bond girls. Indeed, the plot borrows elements from Bond movies, specifically GoldenEye, 1995, but also from Hitchcock's Notorious, 1946, and Sam Raimi's Darkman, 1990. Ambrose serves as an equivalent to Sean Bean's former agent Gambetta from GoldenEye. Both megalomaniacal characters make you wonder how they ever passed a psych exam in their respective top-secret agencies. There's also an early scene where Hunt and Nia follow a flirtatious car race with sex, another cue taken from GoldenEye. Pilfering from Notorious, The plot finds Hunt placing his lover Naya into the enemy's bed, just as FBI agent Cary Grant placed his lover-turned-Mata Hari into Claude Rains' Nazi arms in Hitchcock's film. And for Darkman, a film about a scarred Liam Neeson generating masks to infiltrate his enemies, MI2 uses a scene from Raimi's Pick almost verbatim. Our screaming hero enters the room, the bad guys shoot him, and then they remove his mask to reveal one of their own underneath the mask, his mouth taped shut. Wu also borrows from his own work, everything from Hard Boiled, 1992, to Hard Target, 1993, but also every movie he's made where doves flutter across the screen, which is several. What the hell do flapping doves have to do with anything, anyway? Not much, and yet they appear. Wishy-washy editing and redundant flashbacks remind us of plot points we haven't yet forgotten, and within minutes of the movie's start, the stale mood becomes unintentionally funny, to the degree that this film feels like a parody of Wu movies. Overall, Wu's technique plays to the lowest common denominator. Even the soundtrack is an indication of the inferior intelligence at work. Whereas Mission Impossible employed Danny Elfman and U2 band members Larry Mullen, Jr., and Adam Clayton, the sequel goes simple and includes an electric guitar score from Hans Zimmer, with contributions from metal bands Limp Bizkit and Metallica. Between the original and the sequel, musically, it's like comparing composer Philip Glass to the hair band Poison. If you need further proof of this film's dullness, look at the poster. It shows Cruise running, gun in hand, with a massive ball of fire behind him. When was the last time a fireball sold anything? As it turns out, the answer is the year 2000, with the release of MI2, which grossed $57 million on opening weekend and $215 million in its full North American run. At the very least, Wu's film, even more poorly received by critics than its predecessor, but justifiably this time, grossed enough money to promise a third entry. For this franchise, it's an uncharacteristic chapter best skipped and altogether forgotten. Wu's self-indulgence spoils most scenes, his directorial signatures failing to blend with the material in the way that De Palma's slick control enhanced his spy thriller scenario. And yet, every tool in De Palma's considerable bag of tricks couldn't make this derivative screen story worth the 123-minute runtime. Nothing about the movie works, and even less is worth remembering. Mission Impossible 2 is a 2000 action spy film directed by John Woo and starring Tom Cruise and Thandie Newton. It is the second and the weakest entry in the franchise. The plot is just awful. It is non-existent, almost and always typical and cliched. This is such a different film from the original and definitely for the worse. There are no memorable moments here whatsoever and everything is tired, repetitive, and even repeated from before. It is a basic, uninspired action bore that is difficult to watch. The characters are also incredibly boring and Ethan Hunt is even weaker this time around. The newly introduced Naya is so poor as this typical female character that is so forgettable as is the entire movie. Speaking of female characters, this film has such a strong sexist overtone that bothered me so much. There are so many lines here that are targeted at women and all are angry, sexist, and so incredibly prejudiced and just awful to listen to. They portrayed women here as lying thieves who sleep with men just to trick them. That is such an embarrassing approach, especially for a movie made at the turn of the century. The acting is okay. Thandie Newton is okay, if nothing special. And Tom Cruise is naturally the highlight once again as he is so good in his performance and action, of course. But still, not one of them delivers a particularly strong performance and Anthony Hopkins himself is quite underused. I don't understand why he agreed to do this movie as it is so clearly below him. The action is the biggest reason why this film fails miserably. It is just so boring and so bad. None of it is memorable or unique in any way and some scenes just steal from the original which is so derivative. Yes, comparing it to Mission Impossible 2 is much weaker as it has not one unforgettable and inspiring scene and all of it is more tedious and definitely more flat. I disliked this film so much as it is so weakly edited and directed as well, and even that iconic score isn't used that much. Tom Cruise is back as the odds-defying spy Ethan Hunt in Mission: Impossible 2. As expected, director John Woo delivers plenty of hard-hitting action, explosions, and daredevil driving to boot, but MI2 overall disappoints. My impossible mission was suspending disbelief long enough to appreciate the action sequences of Hunt avoiding death while free climbing in Utah, or navigating a crotch rocket through Aussie traffic and back roads while still sharpshooting, or numerous other ridiculous sequences. The formula of this movie seems to operate on the equation that action plus Tom Cruise equals good flick. Too bad it doesn't pan out that way. In the opening we find Hunt climbing in Utah on vacation. A man alone in the rugged wilderness. After successfully completing an impossible climb, a helicopter approaches and his next mission is delivered. Hunt is to find 3 team members to accompany him. He chooses 2 male experts, Ving Rhames and John Polson, after merging with the sultry master thief Naya in Sevilla, Spain, Thandiwe Newton, and convincing her to join up with him in saving the world by putting a stop to a deadly virus about to be released. Of course, she plays hard to get at first, but the two quickly find themselves in bed together, no nudity. He falls for her and vows to protect her. She becomes the bargaining chip and faces certain death unless Ethan can save the day. Cheesy, if you ask me. Quickly the team finds themselves in Australia in search of the evil turncoat Sean Ambrose, Dougray Scott, who has nasty plans to make a lot of money. After violently stealing this brand new virus from a German scientist of a Sydney-based pharmaceutical company, Ambrose plans to sell the virus and vaccine to the highest bidder. After the release of this deadly virus, everyone in the world will have 2 choices: vaccinate or die. It sounds simple, but it really isn't. The plot becomes confusing and muddled, only a minor vehicle for the intense action and cool photography. While the high-tech gadgets were cool, it seemed to be a cop-out when both Hunt and Ambrose kept switching faces and voices. Sure, it looked real when they pulled off their faces, but it is a hard sell to buy. If only the rest of the film had been as good as some of the world beat music woven into the film. There are about a dozen instances of offensive language, including misusing God's name. Sex is implied in 2 instances, though there is no nudity. Sexual innuendo is also present, though not abundant. The violence is extreme, with some brutal fight scenes and plenty of explosions, car chases, and the like. Unless you're a die-hard fan of Cruise, John Woo, or the old Mission: Impossible TV series, I suggest skipping Mission: Impossible 2 in the theater. It may be worth a look on video if impossible Bond-style action is appealing to you. Due to the film style of director John Woo, Tom Cruise was decent. He delivered more than a strong enough performance to make the most of the material and overdone cinematic moments in the storyline. His best moments were without question his stunts that were clearly taken to the next level in regards to the first film. Cruise was hanging off the side of cliffs, diving out of buildings and helicopters, and the sequences were easily eye-popping and attention-grabbing. Anthony Hopkins was enjoyable as the arrogant boss, and he was able to add a small yet impactful element to this film despite his lack of screen time. Ving Rhames was back, and it was fun to see the continuation of his friendship being built with Cruise's character. Rhames was smooth again in his delivery of Luther and once again gave the story a solid side character. John Polson was definitely enjoyable as a hint of comic relief, and he did provide for a couple chuckles, but the change to Simon Pegg in future films was a clear upgrade. Going back and watching this one again, you can only think of Pegg and how, while Polson is funny at times, he is just not as good as Pegg has been in his additions to future works. Dougray Scott was believable as the antagonist. His delivery was annoying in some scenes, but he still managed to convey the persona of a capable, dangerous man. Thandie Newton was decent as well, but I felt her role was way too underwritten. She came off very bland and underdeveloped. Her dialogue could have been much more deeper to actually sell her as a thief herself, which this film clearly did not do. The story in the sequel was also the simplest of the series. It was a passable script for a traditional action film but not a suitable entry in the Mission: Impossible series. On the positive side, the simple script was loaded with more than enough action to pass the time where a thought-provoking script was lacking. The script was too focused on a love story, and while it had its moments, it came across as too neat of a convenience to make for a plot twist early in the film to try and build some kind of suspense. I can understand the character of Ethan Hunt growing over time, and when he was younger could have made some mistakes, but despite the beauty of the female lead, it's implausible he would have chose his actions as the story did for him. But hey, love at first sight, I guess I can roll with it given the film forced that notion in full Hollywood cheesiness during a few different moments that came off as chuckle-worthy. Their cinematography was both very good, and very bad at different moments. Unfortunately, more on the latter. Do not get me wrong, there are some amazing action-filled moments, from well-captured motorcycle chase, great camera work in the creation of the traditional impossible mission in the second act. Added to the mix was a beautifully shot scene with Cruise rock climbing in Utah and a plethora of shootouts and fistfights. On the downside, director John Woo let his trendy, only at the time, film style get the best of him. There are some classic Woo flicks out there, but this was not one of them, for me. This turned out to be one of his more forced projects, and with such a directorial main stage alongside Cruise in the summer of 2000, it was an opportunity wasted. There were simply too many forced and cheesy moments film style-wise that did nothing but hinder the quality of the action that was being filmed. The amount of slow-motion filming was so overdone it became laughable. John Woo does have a great creative eye, but during this project he just tried too hard to wow audiences, that the abundance of stylistic action, pacing and overly dramatic score during some of the moments come across as eye-rolling today. The overuse of styling was not a complete hindrance, and in Woo's efforts there were some visually stunning shots and simple additions to common movie moments that did add some allure. However, with the amount of tricks he tried, and the choice of music for the film score, he completely missed the tone and vibe the rest of the films bring. In the end, Mission: Impossible 2 had its moments and is a fun turn-your-brain-off action film that packs plenty of action and adventure. Only movies with this title are not supposed to be brainless and filled with shallow characters, overacting and forced moments that may have worked at the time, but come across as slightly kiddish today. It was still a better than average action romp, and Cruise give his all to make the film seem as realistic as possible. For that, this film is not a complete waste and still a fun enough entry in the franchise, but more grows forgettable as each new movie hits cinemas. Every week this summer, we'll be taking an historical tour of the Hollywood blockbuster by examining an older film that is in some way a spiritual precursor to one of the weekend's wide releases. This week, Mission: Impossible, Rogue Nation continues the unexpected late flowering of a TV-derived spy franchise into its best self. And now, may I present its worst self. There's nothing new in the observation that anybody within any interest in the matter already made between 1993's Hard Target and 2003's Paycheck, for an unqualified genius of an action movie director, with two different candidates for best action film ever made in his career in the form of The Killer and Hard Boiled. John Woo surely could not put a single foot right during his layover in Hollywood. Out of his 6 American features, the absolute best is surely 1997's Face/Off, and even that film is closer to good enough than all-time genre classic. We can't just blame the language barrier. Even the most culturally non-specific elements of action filmmaking are deeply compromised. I bring this up in connection to Mission: Impossible 2 from the summer of 2000, both because it is possibly my least favorite of Woo's American films, though that is a competitive race, and because it so beautifully typifies how badly he was fumbling the basic skills that he had so recently used better than just about anyone else living. MI2, I had forgotten how beastly the abbreviations of the titles for this and Mission: Impossible 3 looked, was a movie literally conceived around its action set pieces. This was not merely something the filmmakers weren't ashamed of, they broadcast it, like it was a proof of how focused they were on a great action experience. Now that it's standard operating procedure for the Mission: Impossibles to construct their narratives exactly this way, it's easy to lose track of how thoroughly dangerous a strategy this is, because there is a very strong possibility that you end up with a story exactly like the one Mi2 suffers from, but my present concern isn't the film's storytelling woes. The thing is, if you make a point of coming up with action sequences along which to strong a narrative, rather than the other way around, it stands to reason that the action will be pretty fucking terrific, right? And Mi2 can't even get that right. It has one gunfight scene that is, so far as you can make it out through the choppy editing, solid middle-tier woo, and the climax involves one very impressive knife fight stunt and some fantastical wire work that is, so far as you can make it out through the outright incoherent editing, daunting and impressive and poetic. But that's pretty much it, unless you count the early rock climbing scene that's more of an amuse-bouche than an action sequence proper. There's a ghastly car chase sort of sequence that doubles as the two main characters flirting, and it is utterly dumb and plagued with slow motion. The film as a whole is plagued with slow motion, like Wu decided it was his thing and never stopped to wonder if it belonged in this shot or that shot particularly, and there's a scene that tries much too hard to remind us of the exquisite suspended in the computer room scene from the 1996 Mission Impossible, undone by familiarity and the worst visual effects of the whole movie. And when all is said and done, none of these things represent nearly a large enough percentage of the 123-minute running time, itself cut down savagely from Wu's mythological intended cut of some 3.5 hours, which is largely devoted to inching through a bare-bones plot. Even that's being polite, the first 33 minutes of the film aren't inching. They're just fucking stopped there, staring earnestly as the characters repeat the exact same beat for 20 minutes. The plot this time, Russian scientist Dr. Vladimir Nekhorvich, Raid Serbzija, has a cutesy named bioweapon Chimera, and its even more cutesy cure, Bellerophon, and he's taking them to the United States and the Impossible Missions Force, owing to his trust and friendship with IMF agent Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise. Unfortunately, ex-IMF agent Sean Ambrose, Dougray Scott, wearing an Ethan mask and a little electronic patch that allows him to speak in Ethan's voice, confronts Nekhorvich on a plane and steals the chemicals, before forcing the plane to crash. Naturally enough, Ethan himself is assigned by IMF executive Swanbeck, Anthony Hopkins, somnambulant, to track down Ambrose. With one curious point of insistence, Ethan can pick whatever two IMF agents he wants, but he absolutely must also recruit the civilian con artist and thief Nyanordov Hall, Thandie Newton. And here the film walks out of the room, right in the middle of a sentence, leaving us all baffled as to whether we should, follow it, or just wait there for it to come back. Anyway, it is pure cinematic death as we watch in what feels like real time for the days that it takes Ethan to persuade Naya, whose special skill, it turns out, is not thievery, but being Ambrose's ex-girlfriend, which easily makes this the most condescending of all the female roles in this enormously sausage-festy franchise, to join his team. At a certain point, that highly elaborate car flirtation happens, to augment the implausibly fast and thorough physical flirtation they've already launched into, and it is hard to completely hate it, because of how elaborately and well executed it is, but it's also hard to love it, because it is the silliest goddamn thing. Eventually, the movie starts to move again, though not with any particular urgency. What happens in the remaining 3/4 of the film is frankly a bit unfocused. We know all along that Ethan wants to stop Ambrose from using an apocalyptic bioweapon, but not always how this or that particular scene is going to aid him in that goal. On paper, this is all marvelous. Wu and screenwriter Robert Towne, working from a story originally by Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga, are more interested with lingering on moments and characters, and allowing production designer Tom Sanders and cinematographer Jeffrey L. Kimball to stage beautiful collages of color and light and kinetic movement. It's a massive tentpole action movie that wants to attend to small poetic moments in the background, and allow the characters to inhabit moments, and what's not interesting about that? In practice, everything. Part of it, surely, is that the film was cut down so dramatically, suggesting that what's left is connective tissue more than narrative movie. But part of it is just plain old rocky, confused filmmaking. Certainly, the film's editing, by Stephen Kemper and Christian Wagner, is as conspicuously lousy as it could possibly manage to be. From the moment during Ethan's reintroduction on Utah mountaintops that the scene cuts between 4 different angles of his hands slipping in less than a second, the movie throws its lot in with hectic, clarity-demolishing over-editing, sometimes so giddy that it's almost fun in a bad way. The explosive cut to the Utah scene, a dancer spinning across the screen to create the gaudiest wipe I have ever seen in a professional motion picture. Hans Zimmer's score, I suspect at Wu's urging, also trips near to so bad it's good territory, with its soaring use of a wordless female voice doing more than all the slow motion and all the dubs in the world ever could to render Wu's aesthetic as a self-parody. The performances are all over the map. Cruz plays his cocky charming shtick with an unusual layer of uncertainty and inauthenticity, and Newton is astonishingly, uncharacteristically leaden, though with a role like that, how could she be otherwise? Scott is the most blank villain in a franchise that has had a fairly consistent villain problem, and the best thing about his presence here is that it prevented him from playing Wolverine in X-Men. And those are basically the only actors that the film cares about in the slightest. As for what it does care about, I cannot say. Wu's best films are all about movement of people relative to the camera and the violence happening around him, but MI2 is almost exactly the opposite of that. It is inert, subdivided into tiny little static moments cut together fast enough to synthesis kineticism. Visually, the film is soothing, not exciting, exactly the wrong thing for an action movie of any sort to be, or a sequel to a film noted for its intense thriller sequences, or a movie whose character beats are so generic that we just need to be distracted from them. Oh, it's pretty in its gauzy way, the polish is there, but it's all in service to nonsense. Well, I never thought I'd say this, but this is the Attack of the Clones of the Mission Impossible franchise, a mostly dull and semi-unbearable movie only to be saved by the final half hour. For me, it's so true. The movie's central draw is the romance between Ethan and Nia, which no one really buys because it's so forced and quick in the beginning with nearly zero chemistry between the characters. I'm not kidding. Like, their very first interaction of any kind is a long, slow emo stare through a bonfire. Literally, it's the love at first sight cliché. Then, it's him catching her in the middle of stealing a necklace, then an awkward on top, on bottom tub moment, and basically within the 5 minutes, they're bumping uglies and I'd swear to God, he was about to propose. I would have been angrier, but this was paced so damn quickly that by the time my brain processed an emotion, I was on the next scene and I'd forget to be angry or annoyed. Regardless, because so much of Ethan and Nia's motivations are tied to each other's relationship, which is unbelievably shallow and contrived, you never really care if she lives or dies. It doesn't help that she has very little development. Give Padme some credit, despite the fact that she ends up marrying a dude that slaughters sand people, women and children, she at least has a character that we can understand. She wants to fight against those that would try to assassinate her and see her political ideas, which are so close to being ratified, or whatever, and is able to legitimately hold her own in a fight, arguably more capable than her own romantic interest. But Nia, she's literally just a chick for Ethan to save. I couldn't tell you one thing about Nia, other than, she's pretty. And British. Which is a huge disservice to Newton, who is an otherwise good actress, and yet she's relegated to a role that one would find in an 80s action film. Misogyny, gotta love it. Oh, and don't get me started on blatantly sexist line from Swanbeck, to go to bed with a man and lie to him. She's a woman, she's got all the training she needs. Wow, just wow. I may have given the first film crap about dumb mistakes, but this is a facepalm of epic proportions. Ambrose is also a pretty lame villain, more akin to a child who doesn't like other kids playing with his toys and in serious need of a spanking, rather than a dude who is essentially an evil version of Ethan. He basically does evil things for no practical reason other than to show the audience that he's evil. It also doesn't help that the movie opens on a monologue that says, every hero needs a villain. Screenwriting 101, kids, unless you're writing an animated comedy or a campy superhero movie, or both, the word villain should never be in the dialogue. It's a highly old-fashioned term nowadays where the demand for more complex and morally gray antagonists is higher than ever. The only reason why he's arguably one of the more memorable villains of the franchise isn't for positive reasons. It's because Scott's acting, whether it's because he himself is a bad actor, or Wu couldn't give him direction worth a damn, is so hammy and bad. And yes, let's talk about Wu's style of direction here. Depending on how you look at it, his style either absolutely doesn't fit, or fits almost too perfectly within Mission Impossible, especially when you consider how over-the-top awesome the franchise gets later on. Not that I'm any particular expert on Wu's body of work, as I've only seen Hard Boiled, 1992, and The Killer, 1989, but his use of slow-mo in this movie is beyond obnoxious. In fact, there's really only a handful of moments in the entire movie where I thought it worked: the epic dove flying through the flaming doorway with Ethan walking by, staring at Ambrose with the FKU look, and most of the over-the-top stunts during the motorcycle chase scene in the third act, but even that overstays its welcome during the climactic fist fight between Ethan and Ambrose. Beyond that, it's mostly useless. Also, seriously, since when was Ethan a kung fu guy? I mean, he's kicking, and flipping, and shit. He didn't do that in the last flick, he's never done it since. Dumb, but entertaining. But like I said, I highly enjoyed the final act. I mean, you've got everything. Dual-wielding guns, explosions, kung fu, slow-mo, just a whole lot of over-the-top nonsense, but big heaping dose of awesome. It's ridiculous, but I enjoy the final act with absolutely no irony in my tone. Really, the actions are the best parts. It's everything in between that's a chore to get through. By the way, I wanted to share a pointless story, so if you want to skip ahead, just scroll past this paragraph and my review will close out. Also, spoilers ahead. Anyway, boring story. Has anyone heard of the Mandela effect? It's the effect when you remember something one way, but in reality, it's completely different. Like, remembering Curious George had a tail, even though he never did, or remembering Captain Kirk saying "beam me up, Scotty," even though he never said it in the show. Anyway, this movie gave me that. In 1996, Sandra Bullock starred in a movie called The Net. A remarkably forgettable film, with the only exception being that Sandra Bullock looked amazingly hot in a bikini. But for whatever reason, I remember this movie's climax. Specifically, there's a bit where Bullock's character is being pursued by the bad guy of the movie and is hunting her in a dark area. He thinks he sees her and shoots her, but inadvertently kills his female partner. Whenever this memory used to creep up on me, I would remember the bad guy screaming when he realized his foolish mistake. However, I rewatched The Net some recent years ago, and when this moment came up, I was stunned to realize that the bad guy's only reaction is saying, "shit." To this day, I was convinced that he screamed in an over-the-top way and wondered to myself how the hell I remembered it the way I did. But guess what? This scene does happen, just not in The Net. It happens in this movie when Ambrose accidentally killed his partner Hugh Stamp, Richard Roxburgh, wearing an Ethan mask. Some freakin' how, I mixed these movies up big time and I have no idea how. They were made 4 years apart, are wildly different movies, with the only thing in common being the bad guy killing the wrong person. Overall, this was not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination. But give it some credit, it's probably what inspired a perfect mesh of the first film and this one down the line, as the franchise does get over the top, like this movie, but with more effort put into the stories and plots, like in the first one. So maybe this is the worst of the franchise, but you gotta appreciate what it ultimately lead to, and you gotta have fun with that insane climax. I can't say that I would ever rewatch the movie as a whole, but the action's worth revisiting on YouTube, I'd say. Not written very well, Not always the best directed, but hardly the worst thing to come out of Hollywood. I'd say it's only worth seeing once, just to see what it would later inspire. I'm slowly working my way through the Mission Impossible series because I want to watch Dead Reckoning, but for some reason, my brain won't let me until I've rewatched them all. You can read my review of MI1 here. Now I'm looking at MI2, clearly directed by John Woo, and filled to the brim with cartwheeling gunfights and doves, yes, all the doves. As a quick digression, John Woo believes doves are symbolic messengers of God, Source, so they make prominent appearances in all his films. But enough about flying rats, let's talk about the movie. MI2 seems to take itself far less seriously than MI1, but I honestly can't tell if that's on purpose or just the film showing its age. The action scenes are over the top, the dialogue is trash, and there are so many close-ups of Tom Cruise and Thandiwe Newton locking eyes, because how else were we going to know they wanted to bang? I laughed out loud in all the wrong places, but early 2000s action really was a special breed of film. Much like the first movie, the acting performances are rough, but Tom Cruise finds his footing a little more in the character of Ethan Hunt. Don't get me wrong, it's still painful to watch any of the film's quiet, brooding moments, but the first entry set the bar low. The other agents on Ethan's crew are mostly forgettable, but that might just be me longing for Simon Pegg only one more movie to go there. Thankfully, the ensemble isn't the focus, it's the action. MI2 has some spectacular fight scenes that feel kinetic and insane. Even the opening shot of Tom Cruise free climbing in Utah was damned cool, if also a bit ridiculous. Unfortunately, the climactic fight has the worst motorcycle chase I've seen in a movie. There are a solid 5 minutes of two motorcycles circling and jumping over one another with enough schizophrenic jump cuts to nearly give me a seizure. Put shortly, it was bad. Speaking of directorial choices, just about every other scene has a dramatic camera rotating away in the sky while a main character looks at the horizon. It got to the point that I was worried about camera operators having vertigo. Hopefully, someone checked them out. Inexplicably, I still enjoyed this film more than the first. Maybe it's because I believe Mission Impossible is better the farther away from reality it gets. Yes, there are no less than 4 scenes of agents ripping fake faces off, but John Woo was only 3 years removed from Face Off at this point, so I'll cut him some slack. The acting isn't great, the action is a mixed bag, but I laughed and don't regret the 2 hours I spent with Ethan and the gang. The original Mission Impossible, directed by Brian De Palma, was a huge success, and would naturally get a sequel. Instead of the original director being in charge of it, it's John Woo who directs this movie. Woo, known for his over-the-top action movies like Broken Arrow and Face Off, so you can expect the kind of movie that we got with Mission Impossible 2. It's known by pretty much everyone as being by far the worst in the series, and for very good reason. However, the biggest problem with the movie isn't necessarily that it's cheesy and stupid, it's that it tries to do that while still having a rather dull plot. It's a rather mixed bag. From the very beginning you can tell that something is off. By the time we cut to Tom Cruise rock climbing, you begin to notice that this movie seems like it's very much an 80s movie, whether it be the music, the slow motion, the cheesy dialogue, Tom Cruise wearing sunglasses. It's not surprised that The Matrix came out the previous year, or Tom Cruise's hair. In order to enjoy it, you have to know that it's not really a Mission Impossible movie. Even the ridiculous aspects of the other films are amplified. For example, there are at least 4 face mask reveals over the course of the movie with no explanation or showing of characters even creating them. This is very much a standard Tom Cruise action movie, not a Mission Impossible movie. At first one would think, okay, it's not a Mission Impossible movie or a good movie, but at least it could be an entertaining movie. However, this movie is really dull and has such a mediocre story. On top of that, this movie has so much exposition dumps, and ironically it tries way too hard to be serious. While this movie is very over the top with its action scenes, we don't get many of them until over an hour into the movie, and know that first hour isn't entertaining or intriguing in the slightest. If this movie was consistently cheesy and over the top, at least this movie would work on some way. But here we have a really by the numbers and average action movie that just has some moments of enjoyable ridiculousness. None of the cast do that great here. Tom Cruise is not Ethan Hunt here. He is trying to play an American James Bond, Brosnan era. It's actually rather jarring how goofy he is here. He has a lot of charm, says one-liners and acts like a playboy. Even the villain notes that he grins like an idiot every 15 minutes. While Ethan Hunt in the first Mission Impossible wasn't particularly deep and had some moments where he was just invincible, the character improved in MI3, he still had some vulnerable moments and wasn't a James Bond sort of character. For whatever reason that wasn't present in the second film. Tom Cruise tries his best here though. To his credit, he does go all in with whatever he was told to do. He does have genuine charisma and is very dedicated. Also, all his stunts are great and he is worth all the praise for it, from rock climbing in Utah to having a knife nearly touch his eye halfway through a very intense fight scene near the end. Thandie Newton is a great actress, but here she's got really nothing to work with and doesn't leave any kind of impression. The relationship between her character and Cruise is so unbelievable and hilarious. Ethan Hunt has the smallest team here out of all the movies, with only 2 people. The first is Ving Rhames, who returns as Luther Stickle, having appeared in every Mission Impossible movie. He's one of the best characters of the series. Unfortunately, it seems that all the personality and humor was sucked from him, and I have no idea why. Despite this, he still fared better than the second team member Bill Baird, played by John Polson, who was completely forgettable. The villain played by Dougray Scott is really silly, cliché, and over the top, and not in an enjoyable way. He's also really boring and dull, and he gets quite a bit of screen time, so when he was on screen he was just kind of annoying. He's really hard to take seriously and is by far the worst villain in the series. Richard Roxburgh plays another villain, but he is a little better than Scott. Brendan Gleeson is in this movie for some reason. He plays such a small role it makes you wonder why he was in there to begin with. Anthony Hopkins is also in this movie in one scene for some reason. He just comes and he goes quickly. John Woo is the most prominent person in the entire movie. His style is everywhere. There is an awful lots of slow-mo, even in non-action scenes. There are people flipping and flying everywhere, and there are doves flying in front of the camera. To Woo's credit, the action scenes, for as over the top as they are pretty good and entertaining for what they are. In the third act, John Woo dials up the craziness to 11 and is filled with explosions, motorcycles, slow motion, people justing with motorcycles and jumping in mid-air to collide with each other. It's absolutely wild. The third act is so ridiculously stupid and filled with so many action cliches that it's actually entertaining, and you stop caring about the dull plot. Also, the end fight features some pretty good stunts. In fact, the fight scenes are all done pretty well, even if it does feel out of place from other Mission Impossible movies. The CGI is quite bad, and doesn't really hold up today, but it's far from being the main problem with the movie. Hans Zimmer's score is pretty good. If you plan on watching the Mission Impossible movies, you don't need to watch this one. There's not really anything you're missing. It really has a dull plot with not much of substance, and despite all the entertainment factors, it's still not enough to make this a completely entertaining movie. With that said, there is some fun to be had with Mission Impossible 2. Tom Cruise, despite not being Ethan Hunt here, is very dedicated. Some of the action is entertaining, especially in the third act, and it features so many silly moments that end up being hilarious. Just don't treat it as a Mission Impossible movie. Be aware that it's not like the other Mission Impossible movies, and I mean that in a bad way. Yes, I know. It's not a great John Woo movie, it's not a great action movie, it's not even a great movie. However, I don't think that makes it a bad movie. I get really annoyed at this idea that if it isn't the best thing ever, then it has to be the worst thing ever as a result. About the only thing more annoying is the groupthink thing that happens to some movies, where just because the internet said it was bad, people just fall into line and hate on it. It's like how everyone today pretends that they always thought the Ewoks were stupid even though they spent the better part of the 80s with an Ewok doll in their backpack, and if they're honest they'll admit that it was that wicked doll that really gave them their first kiss. Fanboys are essentially liars. They like to claim they always believed this or that, but in reality their opinions are as fluid and malleable as anyone else's. I've never quite understood why people aren't allowed to change their views with time, but it seems to be a fact that your views on anything from politics to entertainment must remain carved in stone forever and never deviate 1 inch. It bugs me. Yes, there's a lot wrong with this movie, but it's not that bad. It gets a lot of flack for not being as good as John Woo's older movies, and not being as tense as De Palma's installment. That's justified flack though. What we actually have here, is a movie that should have been better but wasn't. Let's look at why that might be. De Palma's movie didn't make as much narrative sense as it should have, but neither do a lot of Hitchcock movies, and I'm going to get flamed up the butt just for suggesting there's anything wrong with old Hitch's movies. What the first movie did, was create a good atmosphere of tension and drama, even if it was at the expense of sense or logic. Lots of De Palma's are like that though, so I don't see why we should start to criticize him for it now. However, why should this be a tense mystery? John Woo was and is an action director. His movies influenced how action movies would be made in the 90s and 00s. He was one of the main proponents of the heroic bloodshed genre of action movie. So this movie was to be more action, less tension, more zip bang and less convoluted plot. Pity it didn't turn out so well. I think one of the reasons the movie didn't turn out so hot was due to wanting one little letter to turn into 2 letters and a number. R was made to become PG-13 in the editing booth, and the movie lost a lot of the weight behind its punch. Of course, rumor has it that Woo's original cut of the film was 3.5 hours, which I can't help but feel would have made a much worse film. Call me an old stick in the mud, but there isn't much reason for a movie to go over 2 hours. 90 minutes is good for lighter fare. There are only 3 or 4 movies that I know of that really can justify their 3+ hour runtime. In fact, more than half the movies that I've seen that are more than 90 minutes could use a harsh hand at the editing station. While it's not true of all films, most have areas that you could cut without trouble, and a lot of the cuts should happen during the scripting phase. Anytime I hear about a movie still being written while it's being made, I hold my head and prepare for the worst. Well, we're past the 3-paragraph mark and I've not talked about the movie at all yet. Let's not spend too much time wondering why that is. As I said, I actually don't think this is a horrible movie, I just don't think it's a great one. So let's dig in and see why this movie is derided and why I think it's at least okay. The movie starts with one of those fake-out moments when you're supposed to think it's Tom Cruise, only it turns out to be the guy who would have been Wolverine if scheduling on this movie hadn't forced him to drop that role. The character isn't actually interesting enough to learn his name, so we won't bother. Then we cut to Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt doing his best impressing of Capt. Kirk in Star Trek V. Yup, just like William Shatner, Tom Cruise wanted to do free climbing on screen. The problem being that the cruisester is just not the Shat. When he gets to the top of his rock, without the aid of Xenu or a Vulcan, a helicopter fires a rocket at him. The rocket contains a pair of Jujanta 200 superchromatic peril-sensitive sunglasses which Hunt slips on and listens to a recording from his boss. He's got to go recruit Thandie Newton's character, named Naya, to help him in his quest. The action on the plane is silly, but sort of neat. The climbing is sort of neat and the sunglasses briefing is sort of neat. Unfortunately, not much will be neat for a while after this. This being about 2000, it was while the rumors of Tom Cruise being gay were being whispered at their loudest. The problem is that Cruise has absolutely zero chemistry with Thandie Newton. He looks uncomfortable during the intimate scenes, almost scared even. The budding romance between them just doesn't work for me. This is also a John Woo movie, which means it's pretty homoerotic anyway. John Woo's films have always had more interest in the relationships between men than they ever have had between men and women. It's like while he was trying to claim he wasn't gay, Tom Cruise kept picking the gayest things he could think of. So let's skip the recruitment, the seduction, and move right onto the so-called plot. A virus has been stolen by not Wolverine and it's up to Ethan Hunt and co to get it back, or something. It's slightly more complicated than that, but not by much. It's essentially got two MacGuffins, a virus, and the cure for it. Not Wolvie's plan was to steal both, but he only got the cure for the virus. So he needs to get a hold of the virus, so he can create an outbreak, so he can then sell the cure. Hunt is supposed to get the cure and the virus back to his bosses, without letting an outbreak happen. Got it? Okay then. So Hunt gets Nia arrested as a ploy to find not Wolverine, who is hiding out in Australia. We know it's Australia because in the space of a minute they fly by the Sydney Opera House, fly past some kangaroos and have Ving Rhames walk in sheep droppings. So, yes, defiantly Australia. We've got everything people outside Australia know about the place. All we need is someone to hunt a crocodile, drink a can of Foster's, wave around a big knife and we'll be set. So we have some plot, which plods along without much going on. It's always annoying when these action movies try to have a deep and meaningful plot or act like they know how characters should interact. Trying to mix drama and action almost always leads to neither being done very well. What could be a neat, by-the-numbers action/thriller is weighed down by a fairly irritating love triangle that drifts into misogyny more than once and smashes into it head-on several times. While someone clearly wanted Nia to be important to the story, in the end she's just another object to be fought over. She's just not very interesting or useful, and in the end she just pads out what should have been a tighter movie. Instead of being quick and sharp, it's slow and mushy. However, there are a couple of action scenes worth watching. After some plot and stuff, which actually includes someone explaining the whole plot to Hunt while lying in a bed, we come to the first big set piece. Hunt breaks into the pharmaceutical company that has the virus on hand, at the same time not Wolverine breaks into to get the same. He does this with a similar trapeze act like in the last movie. Instead of being dangled by a Frenchman, this time he's dangled from a helicopter. It's silly, and makes only minimal sense, but it is pretty cool. Hunt then breaks in and destroys the virus, but is interrupted at the last moment by not Wolverine, who has come to steal the bug. They stir up such a ruckus that half the security guards in the world turn up with submachine guns. I always have a problem with plans like these. How do the baddies plan to escape? Are they going to just explain that they're totally not with the guy who was killing the bugs? Before Hunt can kill the last bug, Nia shows up with an action scene in tow and injects herself with it. The action scene isn't allowed to be nearly as cool as it could have been, since Paramount decided they wanted a PG-13 rating, and as a result, the editing is a little poor on the sequence. You can tell it was the rating chasing that did it, because the sequence is cross-cut with Ving Rhames in the van being blown up, and that bit works while the gunplay doesn't. I must say though, there is a line during the scene that hits home. Not Wolverine says that the hardest part about pretending to be Hunt is having to grin like an idiot every 15 minutes. Just about every 15 minutes during this movie, I find that he actually is grinning like an idiot over something. He seems to grin like an idiot a lot during this movie. So Hunt runs away from the fight, leaving Nia in the hands of the baddies. At this point, a race against the clock gets going, and it's pretty much action from here on out. I'd talk about some of the dumber plot points, but none of them really matter because they're just something to build suspense before the action gets going. Fortunately, action is something John Woo is pretty good at. Even with the PG-13 hanging over our heads and most the action having to take forms other than gun ballet, it's pretty good. Not great, because Cruise insisted on doing flips and things that make his fights look like big-time wrestling, but good. You've got three major sequences. Fighting in a storage complex on an island makes up the first section, and it's not so great. The island stuff is more about suspense than action really. The second section is probably the best. That's where Hunt escapes the island and the bad guys give chase. This includes a decent amount of gunplay and car chasing, which are two things I like. Do you ever wonder about the cars that get smashed up and wrecked during these car chases? I do. I always wonder if that's just some poor guy's last chance and the car gets smashed up and he can't afford to get it fixed and ends up jumping off a bridge as a result. Or the truck driver who hits a carload of thugs and can't come to grips with the fact that he killed 4 people and descends into a self-destructive spiral of drinking and drugs. Yeah, all of a sudden Tom Cruise shooting a gun while doing a front-wheel wheelie seems less cool, doesn't it? Still, the chase is quite cool and goes into some neat stunt work. The problem is, that chase ends and goes into the third section, which is the hand-to-hand combat bit. Hunt and not Wolverine engage in some fisticuffs on a beach after one of the most ridiculous mid-air slams in history. If you look up MI2 and motorcycle justing, you should be able to find people complaining about it. The whole start of the fight is pretty bad. The fact that it ends with Tom Cruise kicking a gun into the air, flipping, grabbing it as he falls and then shooting the baddie is pretty out there. It's like the end of the silliest western you've ever seen. That doesn't make it uncool, it makes it silly. Too silly for some, not too silly for me. I don't even try to take this movie seriously, so it doesn't matter. Once the baddie is killed, the movie is over. No, really. There are about 2 minutes left in the film once Wolverine is shot. Wu never was all that good at endings, preferring to wrap everything up in a look and a sigh. In this case, Hunt and Nia wander off into the most artificially crowded part I've ever seen in my life. John Woo made a few more movies after this, but frankly his personal brand was pretty badly damaged after this film. He did go back home and make the Red Cliff movies though, and after I get a copy of those I'll let you know how they fared. Mission Impossible 2 is an amazing film, one that transcends petty squabbles over good versus bad. It goes about as hard as it is possible for a movie to go, and is extra in a way few movies are ever truly extra. Watching it feels, at times, like an out-of-body fever dream, and if I am being perfectly honest, I love every second of it. The film is genuinely hard to describe to the uninitiated, though a good starting point is what if John Woo made a James Bond movie. Not just any James Bond movie, mind you, but specifically one of the Pierce Brosnan entries from the 1990s. It has a similar rip from the headlines threat of the moment, in this case bioweapons being bought and sold by big pharmaceutical companies. Dougray Scott's character and performance are obviously modeled on Sean Bean in GoldenEye, the evil version of the hero, equally suave and skilled, but having broken bad, and the early car chase / foreplay encounter between Ethan and Nia, Thandiwe Newton, is lifted straight from a similar scene with 007 and Famke Janssen's Xenia Onatop in that same film. We even get the very British Anthony Hopkins in the role of IMF chief this time around, playing a much more M-like figure than any of Ethan's other bosses across the series. But that overview only scratches the surface. Because Mission Impossible 2 isn't a James Bond movie. It's barely a Mission Impossible movie, even accepting for this franchise's extraordinarily broad self-definition. It is, top to bottom, a John Woo movie, and so much of his utterly singular style developed in Hong Kong heroic bloodshed actioners like A Better Tomorrow and Hard Boiled survives the journey to Hollywood fully intact. Heroes and villains alike dual-wield handguns, a single white dove accompanies the hero as he walks through literal fire, set pieces are punctuated by lovingly indulgent bursts of slow-motion acrobatics, and absolutely no one, at any point in the movie, ever reloads their guns. No matter how many bullets they have fired. The film is also John Woo doing a sort of Alfred Hitchcock pastiche, with the focused duality between Sean, Scott, and Ethan, Nia as the femme fatale in between them, and the strong voyeuristic overtones of Ethan watching Nia as she spies on Sean, and vice versa, with Sean spying on Ethan through Nia. The sheer amount of mask reveals in this one is absolutely and absurdly Freudian, and is the only Mission Impossible movie that uses the masks to instill a fundamental instability about who we are watching at any given moment. Instead of focused bursts of twisty action or carefully crafted moments of espionage, Woo usually deploys the masks by eliding the moment where we see the characters put them on, turning Sean and Ethan into full-on shapeshifters throughout the film, tricksters whose battles often hinge on who can more thoroughly embody the other. This culminates in perhaps the most memorable scene in the movie, where Ethan swaps places with Sean's right-hand man, Hugh Stamp, Richard Roxburgh, and tricks Sean into brutally murdering his only friend in the world. If you stop and think about it for more than a second, the scene makes precious little sense. Did Ethan come to the island with masks for himself and Stamp ready to go, or did he bring the mask-making appliance with him and do it on the fly after being graced with a particularly gnarly burst of inspiration? But it's all pitched at this operatic scale of mythical violence, the masks coming across more like tools of mischievous gods in an ancient epic poem, such that questions of strict realism or feasibility feel entirely out of place. That scene is a centerpiece moment of the third act, and while there is a lot I greatly enjoy in the film up to that point, the biotech infiltration scene in particular is pure dynamite, a clear play on the Langley heist of the first film, but where everything goes wrong and leads to a series of dramatic decisions and escalations that fundamentally reorient the film's stakes. It is the closing stretch where Wu fully unleashes himself, and the movie reaches its delirious peak. Once Ethan arrives on the island, the film blossoms into a grand opera of heroic bloodshed, Tom Cruise stepping into the Chow Yun-fat role as Wu's protagonist, complete with his own guardian angel Dove. There are so many wonderfully unhinged images throughout the film's climax: Ethan walking through the fire like an avenging angel, Ethan taking out multiple carfuls of bad guys with just a motorcycle and a pistol, Ethan and Sean doing a full-on joust with their bikes and colliding in midair, Ethan kicking the gun up from the sand as he drops to the ground to get the final shot on Sean. All of it in sunglasses, of course, with Cruise's long, wavy, positively dreamy hair whipping back and forth in the wind. Perfection. Hans Zimmer's score here is the most early 2000s thing you will ever hear in your life, and dates the film in a way none of the other Mission Impossible movies are dated, but what he does at the climax of the final Sean/Ethan fight is worth specific mention, as Ethan gets into a martial arts stance, shifting his body into an entirely different kind of action language than the car and gun-driven action of the last half hour. Zimmer drops this little gong sound, quiet at first and then reverberating across the soundscape, as all the guitars and synths go away. He then transitions into the kind of percussive beat you would hear in wuxia and kung fu films of the 60s and 70s, rhythmically undergirding the motions of the body and the recurring impacts of fists and feet, as Hunt finishes things in brutal yet graceful acrobatic fashion. It's amazing, a great moment of synthesis where the composer perfectly follows the director as the film shifts from one kind of action language into another. The last time I wrote about this movie, I noted how it felt emblematic of the kind of casually virulent and dismissive misogyny found in so many action films of the 90s and early 00s. I noted in particular one horrifying bit of sexism from Anthony Hopkins' character, replying to Cruise, who insists Nia has no training for this kind of thing, with to go to bed with a man and lie to him. She's a woman. She's got all the training she needs. And that is, indeed, an offensive jaw-dropper of a line. But I think I sold the movie short last time in assuming the film affirms such attitudes by simply featuring them. Wu is actually pretty pointed, in that scene and others, to cut to Ethan looking visibly disgusted by what he just heard. Our hero never plays along with these attitudes, is openly hostile to the idea of putting Nia in a honeypot situation with Sean, and not only bristles at the use of gendered hate language, but sees his rage towards Sean hypercharged by the villain's repeated use of the bitch epithet. This is not to say the film is at all perfect in its gender dynamics. Nia's last real moment of agency comes when she injects herself with the virus, and she's mostly positioned as an absent, distant object for the men to fight over in the final act, but I also appreciate how clearly the film codes Ethan's heroism as antagonistic towards the misogyny of surrounding characters, up to and including his boss. In fact, as weird as Mission Impossible 2 frequently is, I also think the movie is underrated in all the little ways it contributes to Ethan Hunt's characterization, particularly in how the film positions him as a hero. The opening rock climbing scene is a great introduction to the character, showing us that he relaxes in his free time by almost falling to his death free soloing. My favorite flavor of Ethan is the one with at least a couple of screws loose, and in doing so, it also gives us a preview of the kinds of bold stunt-driven storytelling that would eventually become central to the franchise starting in Ghost Protocol. And when the action of the main mission gets underway, Wu's film continually underlines how much Ethan is defined by his refusal to accept collateral damage, his choice to infiltrate the biotech building through an absurd stunt instead of going in guns blazing, leaving him vulnerable to Sean's machinations, and his refusal to sacrifice Naya after she injects herself with the virus, creating all the action of the third act. But as in later films, Mission: Impossible 2 never frames this as a weakness, as Christopher McQuarrie would zero in on in smart and moving ways in the later films. That quality is at the core of Ethan's character, and it's what makes his particular brand of heroism so special and relevant in our 21st century media landscape. Given that the general reaction to the first installment in the Mission Impossible franchise was good, but too much plot, producer-cum-star Tom Cruise faced a difficult challenge with the sequel. However, as Anthony Hopkins Bossman brilliantly says, this isn't mission difficult, it's mission impossible. Difficult should be a walk in the park. Recruiting style specialist director John Woo to give his take on the seminal 60s series, the result is everything the original wasn't: high-tempo action, minimal plotting and an assault to the senses, not the mind. Attempting to steal a deadly virus named Chimera, ex-secret agent, Sean Ambrose, Dougray Scott, plans to make a fortune with the antidote. Getting wind of this, IMF agent Ethan Hunt, Cruise, is sent to recruit thief and Ambrose's ex-Naya Nordhoff Hall, Thandie Newton, so that she can go undercover while he destroys the lab samples. Arguably, this is the most John Woo movie that John Woo has ever made. There are shootouts with guns in each hand. There are doves flapping by as firearms blaze. There's constant hair swishing and billowing clothes, seriously, everything billows. Then there's the operatic martial arts played in slow motion. Indeed, at one point, it's a wonder there isn't a dove flying by with a gun in each talon as his wings swish and billow in slow mo. And yet, while the movie would probably only last about 45 minutes if everything was played in real time, there's no doubting that it's all very beautiful. Of course, at the other end of the scale, the action scenes are mostly high-energy pulse-raising affairs, where the attention deficit disorder masterwork drags you along for the ride. A credit sequence mountain climb, a parachute jump escape, a final bike chase, it's pulse-pounding stuff. Shame then, that it all feels a bit empty. While undoubtedly achieving its aim of not confusing anyone with the plot, there's little substance to go with the style, and the jarring change in tone from post-Cold War paranoia to by-the-numbers Bond feels like dumbing down, which it is. We do get a jazzed-up version of the catchy theme tune via Hans Zimmer's excellent score, but the fake face masks, while perfectly realized as they're pulled off, are overused, and show staples like gadgets, spying and teamwork are largely absent, with returning Ving Rhames and newcomer John Polson not given much to do. Still, the latter complaint is hardly surprising given that we're essentially watching the Tom Cruise show. All in black, shades and with constantly billowing hair, told you, it's true the camera affords him the vital Sezun hero look shot after shot, but Tom's arguably never been cooler. While Scott chomps his lines with accenty quotability, I am gagging for it. And Newton looks good next to the crewster despite going from heartless thief to infatuated girlfriend in no time at all. They're basically here to play opposite him. Oh well, at least Hopkins has fun with his cameo. The second Ethan Hunt film, styled in posters and promotions as MI2, was directed by John Woo. The script was by Robert Towne from A Story, and first draft, I gather, by the Star Trek, The Next Generation writing team of Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga. This is the only non-Trek production the two writers worked on as a team, and I can only surmise that they got the job due to their work on the earlier Paramount features Star Trek Generations and Star Trek: First Contact. That makes this the first MI feature film to have a connection to Star Trek, which was the sister show of the original MI series. The film follows the precedent of the last 5 television seasons, counting both series, by commencing with a cold open establishing the crisis. A scientist named Nek Horvish has arranged with the IMF to deliver a secret called Chimera, and is shepherded on a jet by the only man he trusts, Ethan Hunt, and Tom Cruise's hair is considerably longer than it was the last time. But then Ethan, the pilot, and several others contrive to knock out the crew and passengers of the jet and steal the package the scientist was delivering. Has Ethan gone evil? No, he rips off his Ethan mask to reveal Dougray Scott, and peels off a new innovation, a throat patch that alters his voice, and once it's gone his accent is suddenly Scottish. He and his men point the jet at a mountain and bail out before it crashes. Smash cut to Moab, Utah, where we get the series' first installment of Ethan Hunt Climbs Things, in this case an insanely dangerous free climb of a really high, thin mesa, which Cruise did without a net, but with a harness. Once he's at the top, a helicopter flies in and fires a projectile which Hunt opens to find a pair of sunglasses that play the mission briefing for him in the dulcet tones of Anthony Hopkins, a vast improvement over the previous film's Henry Czerny. Hopkins's spiel goes directly from "Good morning, Mr. Hunt," to "your mission, should you choose to accept it," without any initial exposition, and the mission described is simply to retrieve the stolen Chimera, no more explanation. Already we're getting a sense of the relative emphasis on exposition versus action in this film. Ethan's told he can pick 2 team members of his choosing, but must also recruit Nia Nordhoff-Hall, Thandie Newton, a master thief. Hopkins's voice adds that Hunt should meet him in Seville in 48 hours, and appends a note that the next time Hunt goes on vacation, he should let the IMF know where he's going. Ethan tosses the glasses aside as they self-destruct in a fiery explosion right in front of the camera, leading into a totally incoherent barrage of images under the titles. Oh, is this a John Woo film? Hans Zimmer provides a rock score that at this point only approximates the main title theme, using the ostinato and the chord structure but not the main melody. In Seville, Hunt has a some enchanted evening moment with Nia, i.e. see a stranger across a crowded room, as they gaze at each other in slow motion across a stage where flamenco dancers are performing. The dancers, by the way, are essentially the only women in the film other than Nia. This film fails the Bechdel test on every possible level. Ethan interrupts Nia as she breaks into a safe by a bathtub, and she pulls this man she's just met into the bathtub into a sexually suggestive position as they hide from someone, and they continue to flirt blatantly as he lets her open the safe, but then he trips the alarm and gets her out of the jam by selling the pretense that she's his assistant in a security test of the alarm system, making her return the necklace to its owners first. He tries to recruit her for IM Ferry, but she's not buying. So the movie gets even more self-indulgent as he calls her on her car phone the next morning while chasing after her in another sports car, and they engage in a stupidly dangerous car chase that risks the lives of innocent passers-by as well as each other. And there's this totally dumb moment where he crashes his car into hers to keep her from going off a cliff, and they spin out together in slow motion while exchanging a romantic look, and once she almost goes over another cliff and he pulls her to safety, that's somehow all the courtship they need to end up in bed together. I'm not sure that's what the phrase whirlwind courtship is supposed to mean. So then Ethan meets with Hopkins, who went uncredited in the film but whose name in the script was Mission Commander Swanbeck. Swanbeck explains that, since Nek Horvish would only meet with Hunt and Hunt wasn't available, the IMF sent in Sean Ambrose, Scott, who served as Hunt's double on a couple of missions. But Ambrose went rogue to steal the Chimera, whatever it is. Ethan is shocked to learn that Nia was recruited because she's Ambrose's old flame whom he desperately wants back, so her job is to rekindle their romance. Ethan's dismay at this might be more convincing if there were more to their relationship than one meet cute, several counts of reckless driving, and a one-night stand. Swanbeck also gets in a sexist line about how just being a woman qualifies her to sleep with a man and lie to him. Ethan doesn't want to make her do it, but apparently that whole "should you decide to accept it" thing doesn't mean much anymore. He insists it would be difficult, but Swanbeck says this isn't mission difficult, it's mission impossible. Ouch, too meta. Would've worked better if he'd said, this isn't the difficult missions force, it's the impossible missions force. Because that's what they actually call it in universe, guys. But then, Moore and Braga are the same duo who had Zephram Cochrane say you're astronauts on some kind of Star Trek. Anyway, Naya is reluctant, but Hunt convinces her to go in, promising to have her back. She says it'll only be convincing if she's in trouble that only Ambrose can get her out of, so they arrange for her publicized arrest so he'll come and bail her out. He takes her to his compound located in Sydney Harbour, the second time a movie-length MI installment has used that location. Finally, more than half an hour into the film, we hear a rock version of the Skafrin main theme over a brief montage introducing the two supporting team members, Luther Stickle, Ving Rhames, the master hacker returning from the first film, and Billy Baird, John Polson, who's basically just the pilot and the comic relief. He's sort of an Australian prototype for Simon Pegg's Benji from the following films, but with less personality or screen time. Their command post is a small house in the outback, for some reason. Luther has the only computer that can track or detect the chip implanted in Naya, so they can follow her via satellite. Yup, not only is she the only woman in the film, but they've got her low-jacked. And Ambrose is rather forceful about getting her in bed once they're reunited. Ambrose is also quite upset at his sidekick Hugh, Richard Roxburgh, for making the entirely reasonable suggestion that Naya might be a plant. Later at the horse racing track, I didn't notice if it was the same racetrack used in a couple of the Revival's episodes, but I wouldn't be surprised. Ethan and Billy make contact with Naya while Ambrose meets with McCloy, Brendan Gleeson, the head of Biocide Pharmaceuticals, and shows him data on a digital camera's memory card. Ethan has Naya pickpocket the card and deliver it to him so Luther can view and copy it. The data reveals that Chimera is a deadly virus, sort of a superflu created to test a universal flu antidote called Bellerophon. Ambrose has the cure, and is taking bids from terrorists and rogue states, but he lacks the disease, which he wants. Ethan tells Naya he'll get her out, then sends her to return the disc to Ambrose's jacket, but she gets agitated and puts it in the wrong pocket, which he notices. Later, she's met by Ethan, who tells her she has to stay inside and do everything Ambrose says. At the same time, we cut to McCloy being abducted and met by what appears to be the late Nek Horvish, who makes him think he's been infected with Chimera and goads him into a rather stilted confession that he deliberately created the supervirus as an incentive to market his super cure, as well as deliberately exposing and killing one of his scientists to test it. Nek Horvish knocks him out again and takes off his mask, revealing Ethan. But then we're back to the continuation of the scene with Ethan and Naya at Ambrose's compound. Was what we just saw a flashback? Nope. Once Naya leaves, we find that Ambrose was impersonating Ethan again, and now knows Naya's a spy. He also knows Ethan plans to raid Biocide to destroy the virus, and knows him well enough to anticipate his plan. The movie rather blatantly imitates its predecessor by requiring Ethan to drop on a cable down a very high shaft in order to get to the virus lab without anyone knowing. Then he breaks in and sets to destroying Chimera during a window when some kind of generator is active, so comms are down, and I guess alarms are off or something. I wasn't clear on that part. But Ambrose breaks in another way with Naya, allowing Luther to track them, but Luther can't warn Ethan, plus he almost gets blown up by the baddies. For some reason, the Chimera is in several handy injector guns, and just before Ethan can destroy the last one, the bad guys arrive and there's a real long firefight before the injector falls on the floor and Ambrose gives a hold fire order so it doesn't break open. He sends Naya to retrieve it as a hostage for Ethan's cooperation, and Ethan has finally figured out that Nek Horvish injected Chimera into his own blood and Ambrose's love of killing kept him from retrieving a sample the first time. This serves little narrative purpose except to inspire Naya to inject herself with the virus so Ambrose won't kill her. Why would that work? He doesn't need her alive to retrieve a sample of her blood. Ethan has to leave her behind when he blows out the wall and escapes via parachute, Did I mention the lab was on the 42nd floor? I guess his chute couldn't handle the extra weight. He's got 20 hours to save her before it's incurable. Ambrose meets with McCloy for his payoff for the Bellerophon, but demands not only money but stock options. He's released Naya into downtown Sydney as a typhoid Mary, planning to start an epidemic that will create great demand for the Bellerophon cure and make biocide stock invaluable. It's actually a rather clever plan, except for their total and crashingly stupid failure to place Naya under any kind of supervision. More on that in a bit. We get Ethan Hunt climbing things part 2 as he climbs up to their island meeting place, then he breaks in and deals with the guards in the corridors of the compound, and there's a moment where he does a patented Tom Cruise run in slow motion through a flock of doves that are there because John Woo. He blows the door of the meeting room and gets Hugh's attention, and Hugh comes after him and he releases a grenade and there's a kaboom, and then Hugh drags a mute Ethan, allegedly with a broken jaw, before Ambrose, who shoots him dead, but then he realizes he killed Hugh in an Ethan mask with his mouth duct taped underneath, and Ethan in a Hugh mask has absconded with the Bellerophon and Chimera vials, and also there are doves in the hallway. Which leads to an absurdly long chase with cars and motorcycles that endangers a lot more innocent motorists before gradually getting pared down to Ethan and Ambrose dueling on motorcycles and then charging at each other and leaping off their bikes, which spontaneously explode at exactly the same time for no clear reason, and then having a huge martial arts fight. And at this point I finally realized this was supposed to be an over-the-top, cartoony Hong Kong action flick and just kinda tried going with it. Still pretty stupid, but Cruise does his own stunts pretty impressively, although I could have appreciated the stunt work better without all the slow motion. Meanwhile, Naya has wandered off to a cliff that she plans to throw herself off of rather than infect the city. Gee, I guess it didn't occur to Ambrose that she might have functional legs and a will of her own and should be guarded. I mean, having her stay in downtown Sydney was only the linchpin of his entire plan, after all. But Luther and Billy intercept her just before she cliff dives and bring her to Ethan, but they have to pause for the final shootout between Ethan and Ambrose because he stupidly got into another slugfest with Ambrose after getting a decisive edge over him, because Ambrose insulted Naya. But it doesn't do much more than prolong the already extremely prolonged action, since Naya gets the shot in time, and then Ethan lies to Anthony Hopkins about the accidental destruction of the last Chimera sample he was supposed to retrieve intact, and then he and Naya walk off in a park by Sydney Harbour, and we get an end title song by Limp Bizkit, whatever that is, that incorporates the Skafrin theme into it. This movie didn't have that much plot, I guess, since so much of it was long action set pieces and slow motion. I guess if you like style over substance, and like that particular style, that might be okay, but I found it mostly a rather ludicrous exercise, especially the cartoony excuse for a courtship between Ethan and Naya and the insanely over-the-top bike stunts in the climactic chase. Really, those bikes endure an impossible amount of strenuous riding and being shot at, but then spontaneously explode when the combatants leap off them. And it doesn't feel much like Mission Impossible at all. It's more of a solo mission for Ethan Hunt, with Luther and Billy being secondary supporting players. There's hardly any role-playing or elaborate gambits, except at the racetrack and when they capture McCloy. It's also the only MI installment ever that makes no use of Skafrin's the plot at all, not even in brief snippets. Hans Zimmer's score is in a driving hard rock sort of idiom that doesn't do much for me. Zimmer's a composer I have a mixed response to. He's very chameleonic, good at doing what a director wants from him, so whether I like his scores is often contingent on what director he's working for. Anything he does for a film directed or produced by Christopher Nolan is just a bunch of blaring, droning, niatonal chords that I find generally annoying and tedious, while conversely I've found his work on Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes films and Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to be just the opposite, extremely rich and creative and melodic and fascinating. This score wasn't as ponderous and unpleasant as his Nolan scores, but it didn't do anything for me. I'll give the film this, though, it's the only one of the 4 movies to date that doesn't involve Ethan being suspected of treason and on the run from his own agency. He's got full IMF support and a sanctioned team throughout. So it's odd that we see so little of that team. If anything, it's the villain Ambrose who seems to make more use of familiar IMF tactics than Hunt does, devising elaborate deceptions and strategies to pursue his goals and working with his own team. Cast-wise, Cruise gives a better, more relaxed and confident performance this time around, even though he has less to work with. Ethan Hunt still doesn't have much of a personality. He gets to be a full-fledged romantic lead for the first time, rather than just kind of borderline cheating with another man's wife who turns out to be evil, but the romance is so superficial and absurdly developed that it establishes more about Hunt's driving skills than his emotional life. Thandie Newton is effective as Naya. Her basic role is to be lovely and desirable, and she pulls that off splendidly, but she also manages to give Naya a fair amount of attitude and strength that are better than the material she has to work with. Anthony Hopkins is, well, Anthony Hopkins, though he pretty much phones it in. The other cast members are okay but nothing exceptional. This wasn't really a movie about character drama, it was a movie about car crashes and explosions and fights and a sexy token female and the odd flock of doves. And climbing. Lots of climbing. On reflection, I'm unsure whether we should take this as an actual IMF mission or as a fantasy story Ethan Hunt wrote in his diary in spy school. It's just so very silly and shallow and self-indulgent. And it's an enormous departure from its namesake franchise. I guess it's more successful at being what it wants to be than the first movie was, but what it wants to be is not what a Mission Impossible fan is likely to be looking for. Fortunately, this film would not define the future direction for the film series. Indeed, the gap between this film and its sequel would be the longest in the franchise's history to date, paving the way for yet another, much more effective reinvention. When a rogue agent, Dougray Scott, gets hold of a deadly virus, it is up to Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise, to try to stop him from doing some bad stuff with it. So we go from a complex spy plot to a simple save the world plot. And I'm fine with that, for the most part. On one hand, sometimes you just need a hero trying to stop a villain from doing bad shit, and when it focuses on that it's actually fun. But on another hand, this movie can be quite boring. The first half, to be a bit more exact, as it meanders a bit too much for my taste. But when the second half kicks in, we get the fun, fast-paced, and focused action plot that we want. So overall this plot is fine. The characters in this are, well, they are, how do I put this, flattish. The first movie had tons of good character development, and this doesn't. Tom Cruise of course returns as IMF agent Ethan Hunt, and unlike being a vulnerable and interesting character, in this he's kind of like James Bond. He went from a complex character to a badass archetype. And while he can be fun to watch, I feel like something's kind of missing here. Oh well, at least Tom Cruise is really good in the role. Next we have Dougray Scott as the villain, Sean Ambrose. He's not one of the greatest villains of all time, but he works quite well for the story being told, being an enjoyable foil for Ethan. And Scott gives a really good performance. Next we have Thandie Newton as Naya, a thief that Ethan recruits for the Mission Impossible, and even falls in love with. She feels less like a fully realized character and more like a somewhat generic love interest / prop. But she does get some decent enough moments throughout to make her feel somewhat useful. And Newton is good in the role. Then we get supporting performances from people like Ving Rhames, Anthony Hopkins, Richard Roxburgh, John Polson, Brendan Gleeson, and Raid Serbdzija, all doing okay in their respective roles. The score for the movie was composed by Hans Zimmer, and it's pretty good. It uses an interesting blend of orchestrations, acoustic guitar, and slightly distorted electric guitar to create some pretty cool sounds. It actually helps to make some bits a bit more exciting. As for the theme by Limp Bizkit, it's actually okay when there are no vocals, as the instrumentals are fairly competent. This movie was not directed by Brian De Palma, but was instead helmed by John Woo. And I think he for the most part did a good job. The shots look good and he does make the edit quite interesting. And when we actually get to the action scenes, Woo shows his true colors, and man, that is a good thing. The action scenes in this are fast-paced, badass, brutal, for PG-13, and tons of fun. Say what you want about his pigeon fetish, but you can't deny that Woo knows how to handle action sequences. John Woo's Mission: Impossible 2, 2000, is a film that revels in its style but struggles to deliver a compelling spy thriller worthy of its predecessor. Following the success of Brian De Palma's 1996 Mission: Impossible, expectations were high for the sequel, especially with the action maestro John Woo at the helm. However, what could have been a slick and sophisticated espionage thriller instead devolves into an overly stylized, melodramatic, and often incoherent action film that sacrifices suspense and narrative depth for slow-motion gunfights, excessive romanticism, and gratuitous spectacle. The film follows IMF agent Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise, on a mission to retrieve a deadly biological weapon called Chimera before it falls into the wrong hands. The antagonist, rogue IMF agent Sean Ambrose, Dougray Scott, has stolen the virus and intends to unleash it upon the world, profiting from the sale of its cure. Hunt recruits a professional thief, Nyanordov Hall, Thandiwe Newton, who has a romantic history with Ambrose, to infiltrate his operation and retrieve the virus. What follows is a cat-and-mouse game filled with double crosses, acrobatic stunts, and explosive action sequences. While the premise itself is serviceable for an action spy film, its execution leaves much to be desired. The story lacks the intrigue and intelligence of the first film, feeling more like a generic action flick rather than a carefully woven espionage thriller. The plot beats are predictable, and the screenplay, written by Robert Towne, feels surprisingly basic for a film in the Mission: Impossible franchise. The narrative structure is uneven, bogged down by a forced romance and overly long action sequences that do little to advance the story. Tom Cruise once again delivers a committed performance as Ethan Hunt, but the film does little to explore his character beyond surface-level heroics. While Mission: Impossible, 1996, presented him as a resourceful, strategic agent navigating an intricate web of deception, the sequel reduces him to a typical action hero archetype. Cruise's physical commitment is impressive, his free-climbing sequence in the opening is stunning, but the emotional depth of his character feels diminished. Thandiwe Newton's Naya is introduced as a skilled thief, but she quickly becomes a damsel in distress rather than an active participant in the mission. Her romantic involvement with both Ethan and Ambrose is meant to add tension, but it instead feels artificial and uninspired. Her chemistry with Cruise is passable but nowhere near strong enough to carry the emotional weight the film tries to impose. Dougray Scott's Sean Ambrose is, unfortunately, a weak villain. His motivations are cliché, his presence lacks menace, and he never feels like a formidable adversary for Ethan. Compared to villains like Philip Seymour Hoffman's Owen Davian in Mission: Impossible 3 or Henry Cavill's August Walker in Fallout, Ambrose is forgettable. His dialogue is filled with generic villain lines, and his dynamic with Ethan lacks the psychological complexity that could have made their rivalry more engaging. Ving Rhames returns as Luther Stickle, providing some much-needed comic relief and continuity from the first film, but his role is relatively minor. The rest of the supporting cast, including Richard Roxburgh as Ambrose's henchman and Brendan Gleeson as a pharmaceutical executive, fail to leave a lasting impression. John Woo's signature style is both the film's greatest strength and its biggest flaw. Known for his use of slow-motion, balletic gunfights, and operatic action sequences, Woo brings an unmistakable visual flair to Mission: Impossible 2. However, the execution often feels excessive, prioritizing aesthetics over substance. Many of the action scenes, such as the climactic motorcycle chase and the gunfight in Ambrose's compound, are undeniably stylish but lack the visceral tension that makes action compelling. The overuse of slow motion, doves, and dramatic pauses makes the film feel self-indulgent rather than exhilarating. While Woo's Hard-Boiled, 1992, and Face/Off, 1997, balanced emotional stakes with action. Mission Impossible 2 often feels like a series of music video-style set pieces strung together with a weak narrative. The hand-to-hand combat, particularly in the final act, is choreographed well, but the fight between Ethan and Ambrose lacks a true sense of danger or consequence. Instead, it becomes a drawn-out, stylized brawl that feels more like a showcase for Cruise's physical prowess than a climactic confrontation with real stakes. One of the most glaring missteps in Mission Impossible 2 is its attempt to incorporate a love story at the center of the narrative. The romance between Ethan and Nia feels forced, with little development beyond surface-level attraction. The film devotes a significant amount of time to their relationship, but it never becomes emotionally compelling. A particular low point is the early seduction scene between Ethan and Nia, which tries to establish chemistry through slow-motion glances and melodramatic music. Instead of adding depth to the characters, it feels contrived and out of place in a Mission Impossible film. The franchise is at its best when it focuses on espionage, betrayal, and high-stakes missions, making this detour into romance feel like a miscalculation. The biggest issue with Mission Impossible 2 is its prioritization of action over intelligence. Where the first film thrived on tension, deception, and intricate plot twists, the sequel relies heavily on loud, exaggerated action sequences with little underlying substance. The heist elements, a staple of the franchise, are almost entirely absent, replaced by drawn-out shootouts and impractical stunts. For instance, Ethan's infiltration of the biocide facility to retrieve the virus lacks the precision and clever execution of the Langley break-in from the first film. Instead, it turns into a bombastic shootout that feels more like a generic action movie sequence than a Mission Impossible set piece. Similarly, Ambrose's plan lacks the complexity that would make him a formidable opponent. Unlike the first film, where Ethan had to constantly outthink his enemies, Mission Impossible 2 boils down to brute force rather than strategic espionage. Mission Impossible 2 is, unfortunately, one of the weakest entries in the franchise. While Tom Cruise's dedication, John Woo's stylish action, and Hans Zimmer's dramatic score provide some entertainment value, the film ultimately feels hollow. The weak villain, underdeveloped romance, and excessive reliance on slow-motion action sequences make it a frustrating experience. Compared to later entries like Ghost Protocol, 2011, Rogue Nation, 2015, and Fallout, 2018, which masterfully blend high-stakes action with intricate storytelling, Mission Impossible 2 feels like a relic of early 2000s action cinema that prioritizes aesthetics over substance. It's a film that looks cool but lacks the intelligence, tension, and narrative strength that make the Mission Impossible series great. This film, directed by John Woo, screenplay by Robert Towne, story by Ronald D. Moore, based on Mission Impossible, produced by Tom Cruise, starring Tom Cruise, cinematography Jeffrey L. Kimball, edited by Christian Wagner, music by Hans Zimmer, production companies Paramount Pictures, distributed by Paramount Pictures, release date May 24, 2000, running time 123 minutes, countries United States, language English, budget $120 to $125 million, box office $546.4 million.